everyone. Welcome to this third episode in our series exploring field gemology with GIA. Just going to wait a little bit that we have a few more people joining us. So this Instagram Live is brought to you by GIA, which has been protecting consumers and supporting the global gem and jewelry trade since 1931 through research, education, and laboratory services. And for the third episode in our series, I'm with our fantastic guest, Wim Vertriest, who I'm going to call now to ask him to join us. And we are going to get started. Hello, how are you?
Hi.
Nice to have you back on this series. It's the third episode. If you've missed the two first, you have them either on the YouTube channel of Rapaport Jewelry Pro, or you have them in the reel section of this account and also in the feed. So you have no excuse to have missed the first two episodes, really. So how are you doing today?
Yeah, we had a good day in the office. It's already evening here, so I'm not in the office in Bangkok anymore. But yeah, I had a wonderful stone. Look, that's a bunch of spinel in the office that came in from a very unusual place. Wrote a little bit on an article. So again, like very diverse day in the office, but really, really fun.
Wow, sounds great. And now we're not going to go in the office, we're going to go in a field a bit. Can you just tell us a bit more about what we discussed in the first two episodes for people who've missed it and people are joining us now for this third installment?
Yeah, perfect. So basically GIA and Rapaport teamed up here for like 5 sessions where we try and dig a little bit deeper into what field gemology means and why we should all care a little bit more. And I think in the first installment, we talked a little bit about like generally what it means. And I think the conclusion that we reached there, well, what I think that field gemology is about is where we connect a couple of things. So we try to connect the place, the mining, the culture, the trading of these gemstones, and then obviously the gemstones themselves, because these are all very important pillars in the story of a gemstone. These are all important chapters. I think we all agree that gemstones are a very mystical, romantic thing. There's a lot of things that it's very hard to put our finger on it, on why we like it. It is very personal as well. So a lot of these, we could call it value factors, are very difficult to pinpoint and to quantify. But I think when we look at field gemology, we try to understand things that are happening closer to the source of the gem. And if we try to understand all these things, it will help us understand the actual piece of jewelry a lot better. For example, if we understand how the mining has happened, we will get a better understanding and appreciation for the gemstone we are looking at. If we understand how a gemstone got from a piece of rough in the mountains high up in the Himalayas, how that has journeyed into a piece of jewelry that we now see in a boutique in Paris, for example, that extraordinary journey, if we understand that, if we understand the people that have been involved with it, the people that brought it from the mine to the trade centers, the people that transformed that rough piece into a cut piece, and the whole logic, all the expertise that these people have, if we understand that, we will understand our jewelry better. If we understand how gemstones formed in the earth, we will understand better how truly special these gemstones are. If we understand how the people that are working with these gemstones are impacted by the gemstones, sometimes over generations, a place like Mogok in Myanmar, if we understand what rubies mean for these people, we will appreciate Burmese rubies so much more. If we understand what emeralds mean in Colombian society, for example, or what the meaning of emeralds is in Indian jewelry, and I think we've all been overwhelmed by the Indian style jewelry over the last week, and it's been absolutely
what happened?
amazing.
Something big?
Well, yeah, there was this thing going on in, I think it was in Delhi. They had like a little party there, and a lot of people showed up.
Wasn't on social media at all. I didn't see anything.
Exactly, but a lot of people brought out their finest jewelry for it, and like we could see, for example, that in that culture, there's a lot of significance put on emeralds. So we saw the most amazing emeralds there. Ruby is an important thing. So we saw some really nice ruby work with a lot of bead work, lots of pearls. But for example, I didn't see a single blue sapphire. So if we understand what blue sapphire means in Indian culture, it will just bring so much more appreciation for everything that's going on there. So that's all part of field gemology, that we understand how the culture, the mining, the trading, the geology, and the gemstones, how they are connected. That is what field gemology is all about. So I think last time we talked more about what mining means for the gemstones. So we talked about how gemstones form in the earth, but also how they get taken out of the earth. Because, yeah, whatever way you look at it, we are taking something from the earth, and how that happens and the impact that it could have, maybe on an environment, maybe on the people working there, the income that it brings. So if we understand the impact of mining a lot better, we will understand that. And I think today we're going to talk more about the actual gems itself and the challenges that that brings. Because most gemologists, most gemologists are trained to work in a laboratory environment. Let's call it a laboratory environment. And with a lab, I don't mean wearing white coats and safety goggles. I mean a clean, well-organized environment. You're sitting on a nice chair behind a desk. You have all your tools in front of you. You have some fancy tools maybe. And working with that, you can get a lot of information. I think that's an environment that most people who practice gemology are actually doing it. You have access to maybe a microscope. You can take a refractive index of a polished gem. If you go into even a step further, there's a lot of desktop instruments. For example, there are advanced instruments that are actually cutting edge science, but they are accessible for people on their desk. For example, these lab-grown diamond screening tools. There's a lot of science that goes into it, but we have that just ready, and we can just point it at a stone on our desk and easy. Those are things that we don't have access to in the field.
But if we go back to the field, and first I'm just going to tell our audience, if you have questions for them, please share it. There's a question box also in the feed. We would love to hear from you. You can also tell us where you're joining us from, just to have an idea, what's your background. You can also tell us which part of the industry you're in. We would love to know. That would also help us for the next episode. We have 2 more episodes, so them and I will know what we would like to discuss more. I see some questions about very specific stones, some questions about treatments. That's something that we're going to address a bit later. And obviously, if you're just joining us now, our guest is the manager of field gemology in the GIA office in Bangkok, and I'm the editor-in-chief of Rapaport, of this Instagram channel. So this is who we are, and we would love to know who you are as well. And obviously, we welcome all your questions. And now I have one question. We talked about the tools in the field. Can we see them?
For sure. So I think, first of all, it's really important that the tools that I use are adapted to the stones that I look at. Most of my work focuses on corundum, rubies and sapphires. I can imagine that somebody who focuses on diamonds, for example, or somebody who focuses on topaz or on opal would use completely different tools. Or someone that focuses on tourmaline would maybe use the same tools, but use them in a different way, because some tools can be used in different ways, or you can use the same tool to get different kinds of, let's call them, data out of it, or different observations. So my work that mostly focuses on rough rubies and sapphires, apart from having a quality education and understanding the gemstones, the actual tools that I use most of all is a 10x loop. I think that's something that we're all very familiar with. It is very helpful for me. This is the model that I like. It's been beaten up. It's traveled all around the world. If this loop had a frequent flyer card, it would have quite some upgrades already. And then the second tool that I use most of all is a torch. A torch, a very strong focused light. This is a model I use right now. It is made in Australia. So very strong focused light. You can see if I shine it behind my finger, you could actually see the veins in my finger. So super powerful focused light that I can shine into a stone that would reveal inclusions, color zoning, things like that. I never use my torch to check color because this is a very specific color of light, and I don't know how representative that is for real life. So I use this to check clarity of stones and orientation of some stones, but I don't use this to check the color. If I want to look at the color of a stone, I will do that in natural light. I will go outside and take a look at the stone and judge the color that way. I would never do that in artificial light. So I usually carry a bunch of torches. Some of these you can get online. I have used the flashlight of my phone in these instances because that is also a very powerful light. You're always going to have your phone in your pocket most of the times. So you can just put your stone in front of that light on your phone and you can use that. Now, one thing you can use the light for that is maybe a little bit related to color, but not really judging the color. The way that I use it is to check for dichroism. So the minerals that I look at, corundum, is dichroic, which means that it's got different colors in different directions. So a ruby in a certain axis will look a little bit more purple, and in the other axis will look a little bit more orange. A sapphire will look pure blue, and it will have a stronger green component in the other axis. So if I look at a sapphire and I use the torch on the side and I rotate the stone, and when I see more of that green color come through, that's when I know, okay, I'm looking in this specific greenish axis. So that gives me an idea of how the stone could be oriented, which color is going to be in which direction. So that's how I use my torch. This is something you can also do with a dichroscope. There's a specific tool for that, but I don't carry the dichroscope that often. I sometimes use it, but not that often. This is another brand of torch I use, and this is something that I don't really check color with, but I use it to check color change in some minerals. Because we know that some minerals, gemstones, not only corundums, but also spinels, zircons, things like that, some garnets, they can have different colors when they're submitted to different kind of lights. So this is a torch that has, I hope we can see it, I'm going to shine on my hand. We have white light, we have yellow light. So if I can look at the same stones in white light and in yellow light, and I see that the color changes a lot, I know that we're probably dealing with a color change gemstone here. And this torch also has a UV light option to check fluorescence in stones. Because fluorescence in some stones, especially when it comes to corundum, can be very interesting. In tourmalines, for example, that fluorescence would be basically irrelevant. In most beryls, it would not really be important. But for spinels, for corundums, being able to judge that fluorescence in the field could give me some valuable information that I would like to get in the field already. So that's why I carried that. So that's where, those are the two tools that I use most of all. It's that torch and that loop. Now I do carry a spectroscope with me. So a spectroscope is like this, where you look through the stone, and then you see, could you actually see it? That would be surprising.
I see the light.
Oh no, we just see the reflection of it.
The reflection.
But there is, if you look through this, you would actually see a rainbow. So if you look at this through a full spectrum, you would see all the lights. You would see the entire spectrum of lights are going from red all the way to blue and all the wavelengths in between. So you would see that rainbow. But if you put a stone in front of it, that stone will absorb certain light wavelengths. For example, and then based on which wavelengths get absorbed. So for example, if you know that if all your red gets absorbed, that would mean that a certain thing, or if like you see an absorption line in the blue, that could mean another thing. So that's where I use a spectroscope sometimes. Now, most of the times from a practical perspective is that I use this one to check for zircons, because zircons have a very typical, very easy to check spectrum, and they can sometimes be a little bit tricky to identify in the rough. So that's where I use my spectroscope sometimes to pick out some zircons. And we had a stone that was at first sight identified as a color change garnet. This was in Tanzania a couple of years ago. So we were like, but it wasn't exactly feeling right. And like, we didn't have any other instruments. Like, we can't take a refractive index on this because that would be very helpful to separate a garnet from other species. Or Raman spectroscopy, an advanced technique that we can use to fingerprint this material. We don't really have access to that in the field. But because I felt there was something fishy about this stone.
Thanks, sorry to interrupt you, Wim, but I'm thinking, because that's what I was about to say, is like actually not all the identification can be done in the field, even with the tools, the expertise, the eye. So everything starts in the field, like a kind of the first direction where you can go, but then you need the second stage, right? Like this garnet you're talking about.
Absolutely. So I think with this garnet already, like with all these stones, like we do a first field assessment, and where we're like, okay, these are obviously sapphires. And like in my sapphire identification, I feel pretty confident because I've been doing this for a long time. For example, with like other stones, it can be a little bit more tricky, especially if these are stones that come from a deposit where all the stones are very well rounded. So where all the crystal features have been eroded away, and you all just get these round pebbles. And there it can be pretty tricky to identify. So it was one of those stones. I felt something was off. I checked it with my spectroscope, and we actually got a very nice zircon spectrum out of it. So we were able to identify it with still in the field, but obviously, like you said, there's a limitation to what you can do in the field. And it really depends on your knowledge, your experience, and the tools you're using, but especially how you are using them. Because there are fancy tools that you can buy out there to identify stones with, but if you don't know how to use them or what their limitations are, they're basically useless. So we have made these mistakes in the field where we have done a first identification, and then when we get back to the lab, we have access to more advanced techniques that we could actually check more in depth there, and we could actually identify more specific things. We can make more subtle determinations that are just not possible in the rough, in the field, with the tools and the knowledge and the experience that I or the people in the GIA team have. Obviously, if you are extremely experienced with emeralds, for example, you would be very comfortable with emeralds. But if you're an experienced emeralds rough dealer and somebody puts a parcel of sapphire in front of you, you might actually run into some troubles, even though you are very good with rough. So that's a challenge that we're always facing. But if you are in a more comfortable environment where you are in your air-conditioned office, we were talking about that earlier, that the beauty of having air conditioning if you're working in a hot country. Unfortunately, most mining countries are in a hot country. If you are standing somewhere in the savannah in Africa looking on the hood of a car at a parcel of rough, these are different circumstances than sitting in an air-conditioned office where you have perfect control over the lighting, where you have a microscope, where you have different kinds of tools. So you are gonna probably make mistakes, and we have made these mistakes as well.
Before
we have bought stones
to the mistakes, and we're going to go into the comfort of the air-conditioned office. I'm there with you. I would like just to, it's like the little ad thing. Emerald Elite Exclusive is asking us where can I access the other episodes. So the two first episodes on the Rapaport Jewelry Pro YouTube channel, and also in his Instagram account in a Reels section, you'll have the two first episodes. And it was fascinating knowledge sharing from them. So please check it out. Now back to the office of the GIA in Bangkok. What happens there? It's such an amazing opportunity to have an expert in field gemology who's passionate, knowledgeable, wants you to learn as much as possible. This is the purpose of this series from the GIA and Rapaport. So please ask us questions, ask him questions, because it's really a big luxury to have him. So I see if we have any questions that you want to tell us about identifying rough, especially if it's conundrums, that's Wim's specialty. But if you have other questions on other stones, please do it. And also about the work in the lab. Now we are going into the lab. Tell us, what happens there and how is it different from the field?
Yeah, so in the lab, we have access to a lot more things. We have magnification, which we have with our loop. This is the 10x loop that I have. I don't even know which brand it is because it's completely faded here. But there are multiple brands out there that cover all budgets, all different kinds of magnifications. So that's something that you'd have to fit. This one, I really like the way it feels in my hands, but I also have a lot smaller one, this one here, that I just bring as a backup as well. But in the lab, we obviously, I have a microscope on my desk, so I can go to a lot higher magnification. I can control the lighting a lot different there. I can put very focused light on top of it. I can change the magnification. So that allows me to see in a lot more detail some of the features that we're looking for. I can also look at the rough using more advanced instruments. There are non-destructive techniques that can help you identify the species of a gemstone within a matter of seconds. With Raman spectroscopy is a technique that is very routinely used in the laboratories nowadays, but also is being turned into desktop instruments. There are a number of manufacturers that create desktop Raman units geared towards gemological applications, where you can basically put the stone in there, press a button, and 5 seconds later it tells you this is the mineral we're looking at. Now again, there's limitations to this. The limitation of that instrument is it can only tell you which mineral you're looking at. And we know that sapphire and ruby, for example, they're the same mineral. They're both corundum. So that instrument can't tell you whether it's ruby or sapphire. It can tell you it's corundum, but it can't tell you if it's ruby or sapphire. In the same way, it can tell you it's a beryl, but it can't tell you if it's a morganite, the pink variety, or the aquamarine, the blue variety, or a heliodor, the yellow variety, or a goshenite, that's the colorless variety, or an emerald, the green variety, or a green beryl, the other green variety. It can just tell you that it's an actual beryl. So even with the advanced instruments, there are limitations there. So those are things that we always need to keep in mind, that every instrument, even the most advanced one in the lab, there are limitations to it. But in the lab, we just have access to a lot more instruments that have a lot more control over it and where we can look at it in different levels. But in the fields, I mostly rely on using my loop, using my torch, and obviously all the experience and education that I've built up over the years. This is something that starts during gemological training, but expands a lot over the years. Every stone you look at makes you a little bit better, makes you a little bit more familiar with the material. When I go to a place where there are, for example, a lot of emeralds, I try and go see some people here in Bangkok that have emerald rough, so I can talk with them what they pay attention to, learn from these people. Because there's a lot of places out there where there is a lot of experience, and if you try to get some of that experience, you will minimize the mistakes that you'll make.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Relying on your network of experienced people, and it's super important, especially in that field. And we have, I think, a fantastic question, because I think we're talking so much about AI, and Messy Stones ask you, have you used AI apps on smartphone? And if so, do you feel like they are accurate?
Yeah, so I've seen some of these apps around, and I am very skeptical about them. Because if there's one thing that no one should ever do, it is identify a stone based on a picture. When I say that nobody should do it, that includes computers. I would not feel comfortable identifying gemstones based on a photo. And I think that goes for most people that are experienced in gemstone identification. Sometimes it is very obvious. There are enough clues in the photos that you can be comfortable with. But you would actually want to see the stone, handle the stone, turn the stone, see how it interacts with the light. Look at the stone, look at the surface of it in closer detail, because those are things that will tell you a lot of information. Sometimes visual observation is enough. And in those cases, maybe those apps are right. But I would never put any money on that. I would always trust the experience of a gemologist that has looked at the stone, that has handled the stone, over someone or something that identified a gemstone based on a photo, because they have very, very, very limited information, and usually that amount of information is too limited to make a correct conclusion on the identity of especially a piece of rough or a faceted stone.
Thank you so much. We have actually someone also said gemstone marketing online can't beat a professional experienced eye. I think that's
absolutely. Absolutely.
We agree on that. And we had a nice question for you. Dina Ekel asks you, what are some unexpected stones you may have found in your corundum findings?
So, yeah, when we look, most of these corundums that turn out not to be corundum, they are coming from what we call very mature deposits, mature secondary deposits. So these are places where the gemstones have broken out of their original rock where they formed and have been washed down in the river and are completely tumbled and rounded. So that's where a lot of these stones concentrate. Actually, we had a beautiful blue sapphire. Well, we thought it was a blue sapphire. It was a pebble about this big, about the size of the nail of my little finger, almost perfectly spherical. We thought it was a sapphire, but when we tried looking for dichroism in the laboratory, we couldn't find any. So that just raised some questions for us, and then we checked some other characteristics of the stone, and it actually turned out to be an amazing sky blue spinel. So it was, yeah, which was pretty unexpected, because this was in a mixture of rough out of Madagascar, where we know there is blue spinel present there, but that was a shade of blue that I had never expected, because it was a very nice crisp blue that we associated with like some lighter colored sapphires, but in spinel that was a color I had never encountered before, so that was a pleasant surprise. Now, we've also had unpleasant surprises where
Before we move to that, I have one question. I love the unpleasant surprises. They make for good stories, good learning. Did it help you to know that because he came from Madagascar, if you hadn't known he came from Madagascar, would it have been more difficult for you to actually identify this blue spinel?
Not really. I think it's Madagascar is one, the Ilakaka gem fields specifically are a very mature secondary deposit. So we kind of, like, anything could happen there. Like this could have been an aquamarine, although that would have been more unlikely. But like we do find a bunch of chrysoberyls, garnets, zircons, topazes, all colors of corundums, diamonds, all just mixed into that gem gravel mix, quartzes, the whole thing. So we're kind of open to anything there. Like we know a lot of things can happen there. While if you go more to a primary deposit, so a deposit where we are still in the host rock, we can usually narrow it down to like 1 or 2 or 3 gemstones that occur there, because we kind of know what forms in that rock. While for a secondary deposit where it's just washed down in the river, this could be coming from 100 different places. These gems could be coming from 100 kilometers away and all just end up in that same river. So we could find the most eclectic mix of gem minerals together there. So when you're looking at these materials from these mature secondary deposits, it's really like anything goes there. Like there's no limits. We have found the craziest stuff in there. Unfortunately, some of these pieces have turned out to be glass as well, where I think people have shown us some stones where we could see, okay, this looks exactly like a tumbled stone, where it's rough, it's fractured, the surface is frosty, is damaged. But when we look at it a little bit closer, we see really big gas bubbles. So we kind of know that this is not going to be a natural material. We've encountered synthetics there that we have seen that people have formed them, shaped them so that they look like the natural rough material. So if you're not aware about the presence of synthetics and how you can identify those, even when people did their best to hide those characteristics, it can be pretty tricky. And then even taking it a step further, that people take gems that have been treated and bring those back to the mines and sell those in the mines again. So we have actually bought in the mine stones that we later checked in the laboratory that had pretty significant signs of treatment. Now, obviously, for us, for GIA, that has a very big impact on our research collection. Because remember, we talked about this in the first episode. You can check that back in the reels from GIA and from Rapaport. That GIA does this to understand gemstones better and to build a collection where we put a lot of value on reliability of the provenance. Not on the provenance itself, but on the reliability of that provenance. Because there's a big difference between going to Mozambique and getting a ruby from the ground yourself, or getting a Mozambican ruby from someone who got it from another guy who bought it from a dealer whose neighbor once has been to Tanzania, which is close to Mozambique. So that degree of reliability is very important for us. So when we see that, we kind of trust this material because we got it at the mine. But if we see that there is something wrong with it, like these stones lose all credibility. That entire parcel is put in the lowest reliability pile. We don't throw it away, but it's got other value for research there. Because that is the collection that we use at GIA to study and to do research that we use to build our services on. So when we are offering origin determination reports on, for example, Mozambican ruby, we can do that because we have an entire collection of Mozambican rubies that we've collected. Yes, some we've collected from people that got them from somewhere, but we've also got a huge collection of materials that we went to the mines and got it from the ground ourselves and studied all of those materials. And that gives us a very good understanding of Tanzanian sapphires, Madagascar emeralds, Mozambican rubies, because we went there and we got as close to the source as possible. And right now, like the GIA collection that we've built like that over the last 10 years is more than 25,000 stones. So those are stones that were completely dedicated to research that we use to collect that data. But that first step of collecting it, that is field analysis, that is identification there. And then with the luxury of having GIA behind us, with working there, we can do a lot of follow-up in the lab, of course, and get more advanced data out of it, get more data that we can compare with other stones that we've collected maybe the year before or from a different mine in the same area. And basically create that whole picture, that whole tapestry of data that we get from all these places.
So relating to that, I see a lot of questions in the chat about education, about career. We're going to keep that for the end of this conversation because I would like us just to keep a little bit more on field gemology, but we'll address these questions, especially as we are this education program. But one is more precise about field gemology and ask you, have you ever discovered a new mineral?
Well, I haven't, but GIA has described 2 new minerals in recent years. One of them was a very tiny inclusion in a diamond, where a black speck was identified as a new, I'm going to say it was a nickel sulfide phase that hadn't been identified before. That was named that. When you discover a mineral, you also get the opportunity to name it. So at GIA, we have tried to establish the tradition that we name new minerals discovered at GIA after notable researchers at GIA. So that first mineral was named after Mr. Crowningshield. So Crowningshieldite is the name of that small nickel sulfide. we're talking really, really tiny. These are like the black pinpoints you see in certain diamonds. But at GIA, we have also got a stone in the lab, and this is not in the field. In the field, you would never be able to identify a stone as this is something that isn't known before, because you can't just eliminate all possibilities in the field. But at GIA, we have received a stone that when we did all our testing, it didn't match with anything, which led us to the conclusion this might be something new. At GIA, we don't have the full capacity to describe new minerals, but we have a lot of good friends around the world that can help us with that. So I believe we collaborated with the people at Caltech in California, at the university there, that have different instruments that are not common, actually are not used in gemological science, but are used in mineralogical and geological science, where this is a more routine field. And they were able to confirm and collaborate with us that that was a new mineral that hadn't been described before. It was found in the Mogok Valley. It was a very exotic variety of kind of a beryl. Like, it's not really in the beryl family, but it's really close to it. It's borderline family. And that was named after John Koivula, famous microscope scientist at GIA. So that was named John Koivulite. And to our knowledge, only 2 of those pieces exist. There is one with the initial discoverer still in Mogok, who has 1 piece. And then the other piece that he brought to GIA to have it identified. And that piece is now in the GIA collection because GIA purchased it. So yeah, that is a mineral that we've identified, but that's not really in the field. That is really more on the technical lab side, because I saw some other questions coming through about how does Raman spectroscopy work, how does FTIR spectroscopy work. That is really more technical lab gemology, and that's maybe for another time.
Yeah, we like the field. It feels a little bit more adventurous.
Yeah.
Something very interesting as well, because you talked about this crazy story about people treating the stones and pretending and passing them off as rough, which is crazy. You know, thankfully you're there, GIA is there, analyze them so they don't go into the broader market, because we're interested in the whole pipeline. We start with the film Gemology, but we end up in the retail store where people are actually buying and enjoying the jewelry. So I think that's why we're doing this series. It's so important to know where things come from.
Exactly.
Because this way people get the real origin and authentic and as truthful as we think it is, because based on, you know, everything else. So they have something, you know, that has been researched by experts. Is there anything else that you think would be a nice story? For example, you're a retailer and you want to share a story of origin determination. What do you think? Because, you know, we don't want the client maybe to know about every single tool that's been used to find, but something that kind of makes the connection between the field and the end product of jewelry. What do you think retailers could take away, for example, from this story?
Yeah. First, I want to touch on a little bit of a different thing, and that is, if you go to the field, that doesn't mean that you get more reliable material. Going to the mines doesn't guarantee that you are going to get better products or more reliable products. Actually, it might be the other way around, because if you don't know what you're doing, you might make mistakes when you go closer. Because if you are further down the supply chain, for example, if you go buy rough material in Tucson, then that has passed through a couple of hands already. That has been mined, that has been through a broker, that has been through an exporter, that has been through a wholesaler, someone who brought it to Tucson. All these people have looked at it, and all these people have made their judgment on these stones. So it has been quality controlled 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times. But if you go to the mine, if you go closer to the source, there's less of these controls there, because you're just shortening that chain. So you'll have to rely more on yourself. If you can rely on yourself, that is amazing. For example, I trust my judgment on corundums, that I can pick out treated materials, that I can pick out obvious materials that people brought from somewhere else, synthetics, things like that. If you're not comfortable with that, it could be a big risk to start doing that, because the closer you get to the source, there's still a lot of people trying to cheat and to play the game. there. We have plenty of stories where people have shown us stones pretending they were something else, to the point that we had to develop code names among our team so we could tell to each other, this is an obvious fake stone, or this is an obvious synthetic, without letting them know. Because maybe these people got cheated. Maybe a broker in the field that shows you something, maybe he got cheated by his supplier, and you don't want to upset him. So it's very sensitive to move around all these subjects. But for example,
sorry, Wim, if you come across one of these stones that has a dubious origin, or clearly it's not what it's supposed to do, what do you do as a GIA? You just don't certify. Obviously, you don't certify it for what people expect it to be certified.
In the field, we would never offer any services. So we would never make a report in the field. Reports only get made in the laboratory. So these are questions that aren't valid for our client services. These are just questions that are valid for our research purposes. But a lot of people believe that if you go to the source, you would get more reliable material. And I would argue that that is a very bold statement that you'd have to be very careful about. For example, I've been fortunate enough to go to the Mogok Valley in Myanmar a number of times, so one of the world's most famous ruby localities. While I was there, we were able to visit some of the local temples. At the temples, they are selling souvenirs of gemstones that I could just cite ID as being Madagascar rubies that were glass filled. This was in Mogok, a kilometer from the most famous ruby mines in the world. And there is material from a different continent that has been very intensely treated that is being sold there. So be very careful with believing that if you go closer to the source, that you would get more reliable material. It is the case, but you actually have to be very sure in your own skills, in your suppliers, that you would be able to identify that. Because if you don't have the skills to do that, that could be a very costly mistake. And I think I just saw someone in the comments say that they found some synthetic emeralds mixed in a parcel of other emeralds close to the mines in Pakistan. And I think this person had the same problem that I did, that you have to be very careful to not offend these people, because the people that show you that parcel that has been contaminated, they might not know it. They might have been cheated themselves. So it's a very difficult line to walk sometimes, and it's very sensitive information. But it is very important as a field gemologist, or as someone who buys for research or for a trade closer to the mine, that you're able to trust in your skills and that you're able to identify all these materials correctly.
Thank you. That was a very important point, and it's a nice way to wrap up this series. And also, I think something that Wim has said before is like there's so much going on also in a relationship between the field gemologist and the people at the mine. The way you express how it's important to be respectful, to be thoughtful of the interaction and people, this their livelihood also. I think when you come as a field gemologist, to be very sensitive to all these things, and it's something that you touch upon in other episodes. So, and it's so important. It's the whole, it's more than just a stone. There's people involved in that process, and I think that you're highlighted, and it's so important. You can't just throw and just tell them no, it's not good or something. Exactly. You have to be very sensitive of people, especially in the places where some of these stones are found. So I think that was a really nice point that you made here. We had a lot of questions in live chat. I saw it about diamonds. So I just want to say, it's not that we ignored it. It's just this discussion is really about color gemstones. So any diamond related question can be for another series. But this one, we were so lucky to be able to talk about.
I see one comment come through here that I think in the end, we all realize the limitations of what we can identify in the field. And I think the best guarantee is to take the stone out of the field and to bring it to a reputable lab and get a report there. Because there, the full accepted array of tests can be applied to that stone. You can take an RI, you can study the inclusions, you can look at spectroscopy, you can measure the chemistry, all things you can't do in the field. So in the end, a lab report for questionable stones, questionable in a good way or questionable as I don't know what this is, or questionable as I suspect this is not what they're telling me this is. Whatever the question is, a lab report will settle that for you. Because a lab report from any reputable gem lab will disclose the identity of a stone. It will tell you whether it is a chrysoberyl or a topaz. It will tell you whether it is lab grown or natural, whether that ruby was made in a factory or whether it was grown, whether it grew in the earth. It will tell you the most common treatments in the stones. So the common treatments, for example, if you have a heated ruby, it will be shown in that lab report. While in the trades, in the field, in the wild, it might sometimes be difficult to make that call because you are working with rough stones where you can't really see in the stone, you can't really observe the inclusions, so it might be more difficult to do it there. And I think I see it, there's an excellent question here that somebody asked why taking a refractive index in the field is so hard. And they bring up because it's pretty small equipment. You're right, like a refractometer is about this size. The problem is you're dealing with rough, and a refractive index, you have to take it on a polished surface. So as long as there's no polished surface, you can't really take an RI. So yeah, that's why refractive index have very limited value for me as a field gemologist in what I do.
That's a fascinating job, and you've shared it so passionately with us. Thank you so much. I'm just going, before we finish, if you join us later, this interview is recorded, going to sit on a real section of Rapaport report on the GIA account as well. And please, thank you so much for all the great questions we had today as well. Really appreciate. And for anyone who asks questions about education, a few people ask, how can I become a field gemologist? I would encourage everyone just to contact the GIA and speak to an advisor there and ask questions. So you can be directed. Also, some people ask on which campus they should study. So obviously, based on where we are in the world, as you know, the GIA advisors will be happy to help you and direct you and answer all your questions. And I think you've inspired a lot of vocations, Wim. So
that's what we're here for.
Anyone wanted just to stay in the lab, suddenly they're like, oh, field gemology sounds cool. And also something else, if you have questions for the GIA head of field gemology in Bangkok, please send them to the account, send them to Rapaport Pro, we'll share them. And anything, we have a next episode coming soon. So any questions you would like to have discussed for the next episode, please share with us. We'll be happy to prepare the next episode together to answer all your questions. And thank you so much for people who join us from, I think, a lot of different places. That was great. And thank you to our wonderful guest. And looking forward to the next episode on exploring field gemology with GIA. And thanks to the GIA for sponsoring this episode.
Thank you so much for hosting this, Sonia. This was, again, amazing. Really appreciate you taking all the time and all the effort and the enthusiasm and all the good questions that not only the audience, but you brought in here as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was my pleasure. And please, guys, if you've missed the 2 first episodes, they are available and they're really, really exciting as well. And they cover you have all the different pieces on field gemology with great anecdotes and great insights. So, but you won't see the tools. This episode is the one that had the tools.
So, last look.
And yeah. And we don't share brands. We're not an affiliate site, but you can ask any questions. I'm sure they will be absolutely delighted to answer to you. So, this is it. I clog your inbox for the next 2 months.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much, guys. Have a great day.
Bye. And don't tune in for the next episode that will come very soon. We'll announce the date soon. Bye-bye.